David, we start with the announcement from yourself that you're going to repay the £5 million loan to Sports Direct. How did that come about?
We had a discussion yesterday at the board meeting, and I think, as most of the supporters will know, that my previous view was in fact not to repay the loan. I felt that was kind of some form of compensation for some of the historical negative cash flows, but we really felt that the position we're at the moment is, if we're going to try and really advance the retail business, for the benefit of the company, we just felt it was time to change that decision. So we discussed it at the board meeting last night. The decision was made to repay the loan as long as we could provide the funds, and it then became a question of me going out to those who have agreed to invest in the club and say, well, would you mind giving us an additional £5 million? And what was really nice is within an hour this morning, speaking to George Latham, George Taylor, Paul Murray, John Bennett, Douglas Park, and then obviously myself, within an hour we raised the £5 million. So it was a great further commitment and indication of support for the club, so I was really delighted about that.
That's quite a U-turn in the decision from yourself because of your different viewpoint in the past. Were you content with the decision to overturn that? From a purely emotional point of view, there's still some regret for me that the money is being repaid, quite frankly. But I just felt from a business point of view, it was the right thing to do. And I think in terms of the club going forward, it was actually quite a critical decision for us to go forward with some of the actions that we'd like to take. It was a necessary precursor to that, so it just became necessary from a business point of view. And I repeat, it was phenomenal that within an hour I was able to phone around and get another £5 million, which is in addition to commitments that people have already made to the club and have already committed going forward. So it's a further £5 million. So that was quite gratifying, and it just reinforces the level of commitment that those involved with the club at the moment have to seeing the club getting back to where we all want it to be. How quickly do you anticipate to be able to pay it off by?
That to some extent will be up to Sports Direct. What we will do is we'll communicate with them immediately and say we've made a decision to repay the loan. The funds will be made immediately available, and then that will be against the transfer of securities, because I'm sure, as everyone is aware, Sports Direct took fairly substantial security of club facilities and properties against that loan, and obviously we will repay the loan, but in turn all these securities have to be released as well. So there'll be some legal bits and pieces, but the main thing is we'll communicate today and say, look, this is our decision, we want out and we're going to repay the loan. Yeah,
I was going to ask, was Sports Direct aware of the fact that you were willing to repay the loan before the meeting this morning, or will you then communicate with them this afternoon?
I think they had a sense that we were looking at that in the board meeting. It's something that we were considering. So I think they're alert to the fact that it probably was a likely scenario, that we'd reached the point of just feeling it was the best way forward for the club.
Yeah, do you feel that the club can now progress better in the business kind of model that you want to put in place with this?
Yeah, I think it is quite significant. I hadn't really realised the extent to which the advance of that funds was affecting a number of other things in the club as well. And I think as it dawned on myself and my fellow members on the board, it was a recent decision. It was really developed over the last week, given the position for months had been not to repay it. So it all happened quite quickly, but it was a build-up of a number of events where we just felt it was the right thing to do. And I think also there's a strong business sense for it, but I think also, as we discovered today, the AGM, there's an emotional aspect to it. I think that the impact on the supporters, it was probably greeted with the greatest excitement of anything that was said during the course of the morning.
Did you expect to be able to ring round and raise the money so quickly?
I was hopeful, but to do it within an hour, because I think normally it could have taken a couple of days, but I just said to the chaps, look, I'd really like to be in a position. We have got the AGM, and it would be nice to be able to announce that. But to do it in an hour, I think was a phenomenal result.
That was even kind of against your expectation?
I was very chuffed by that, and chuffed by the speed with which people agreed to it.
And how vital for, as you said, emotionally for the fans, is it to have security back over assets like Murray Park and the training ground?
I thought it was quite important for the fans, and I realised it even more so when we made the announcement there, and I look at the reaction within the hall, and I just generally get a sense that the whole fan base and the whole supporter base will be quite relieved to know that at least the club assets that I think they felt to some extent have been externalised are now back in the family, and I think that is quite important.
Have you kind of now become to realise how important it is to the fans to almost feel security over their own club?
Yeah, you know, it's actually difficult. I don't know if it's just for myself, let's say living in South Africa, there's some elements of distance where sometimes I don't have the temperature of specific issues. I mean, I understand the fans, the supporters, the club, but sometimes a specific aspect grabs their attention and it's not obvious to me why that aspect. And I need my local directors to explain to me sometimes why this is more of an issue than that. But it certainly is one of an issue that seems to have got the fans' attention, and very strongly so, strongly emotionally. And it might just be the person who advanced the funds. You know, it might be if there was a bank sitting the other side of the transaction, they'd see that as being the normal security and there was no threat. But clearly, the specific loan was a very emotional tug from the fans' point of view. And I repeat, I think that's the kind of reaction that we saw this morning when I made the announcement.
And you had a very long board meeting yesterday. Did anything else interesting come out of that from your point of view?
You know, probably the one, I mean, a lot of it was just normal business as usual, but the one issue that had been raised, in fact, that I was not aware of when I came in during the course of this week was the whole living wage issue. Right. And in fact, I think I sent Stuart Robertson an email about 1 o'clock in the morning, on Thursday morning, saying, I've heard of a living wage issue, is this something that affects Rangers? And he gave me a report and I took it to the board also yesterday, and the board has now approved that Rangers will in fact commit to living wage. So it's something that we've agreed to, which I think is a great thing. I think it's something the club should have done, and I think all the board members accepted it's the right way forward. And the rest of it I think was pretty much business as usual, looking at operations, looking at the football team and the normal things you'd expect of a board meeting.
When is it looking likely to implement that living wage, if you have agreed to it now?
Immediately. I mean, the decision was made and it's an immediate decision, so it's something that we will do and we will continue to maintain.
Although you say you weren't aware of that, is that now pleasing that the club that you're chairman of is...
I wasn't aware there was a living wage issue, and it came up in a discussion. I just said, what is this living wage issue? It's something I can expect in South Africa. You know, we have that concept down there, minimum wages. I didn't think it existed in Scotland. And when I found out about it, I asked the club, and I repeat, brought it to the board meeting at short notice under any other business. We discussed it and the board unanimously said, look, that's absolutely right, it's what Rangers should be doing, and it is what we will do, and it is the right thing to do.
Great. I know that you obviously can't speak much about Sports Direct, but are you giving a promise to the fans that you will fight any challenge that comes your way to kind of for security of the club? Yeah,
I think with Sports Direct, we obviously have agreements and legal agreements in place, and whether we like some of them, whether we feel the previous board was out-negotiated in some of them, there's a lot of feelings around it, but the fact is the agreements are in place, and we've just got to be very, very careful how we go about it. But we have studied all the agreements very, very, very carefully. I think we understand them. We've been putting a lot of time and investment into understanding all of our commercial operations. It's not just the Sports Direct side, and you know, it is something that, as you're aware, it's awkward talking about Sports Direct because of the gagging order, but it is something that we're paying a lot of attention to and ensuring that going forward that the retail operations operate in a manner where the fans can support it with the purchasing power, and where the club gets the level of returns. And it's something long term, it's not just the Sports Direct. We have to get the club back to having the strong, robust retail operations that it had previously, and that it needs to have in the future to continue to compete at the level that we want to compete.
Is the overriding aim here, obviously, it's to get the club back to where it belongs, but also is it to provide a stable club and a future that you can plot out and it's not as up and down as maybe it has been in the past? Yeah, I mean, if I look at the club at the moment, I think it's obvious to anyone looking at the club, and it's obvious to everything that's been said about the club, that the club needs funding to get it back to its rightful position. And I regard the club's rightful position as being, at the beginning of every season, having a competitive chance of winning the Premier League against Celtic, being the main rivals, and having a competitive team that can do well in Europe, trying to get in the Champions League sometimes, but kind of guaranteed Europa League. I think that would be a normal Rangers from my point of view. When we get to that point, I think thereafter it's important it's done on a sustainable basis. I think we recognise the need to fund it to get it there, because so much damage was done to the club, and you can't rebuild it without making that investment, which is why we are here. But once we get it back there, I think it has to be done on a sustainable basis. You can't continue to go to shareholders all the time. That's not a sustainable business model. You spoke about approaching outside investors during the meeting. You said that you don't want to do that right now. Why is that, and when do you expect to be able to approach people?
I just don't think we've got a case to offer. And if someone was to say to me, well, what's happening with the litigation, what's happening with Sports Direct, what's happening with this, what's happening with what's happening with all of this, you can't really give an answer to that would allow an investor to take a positive view in the club. Hence, you're going to get a very deep discount. Someone might come and say, I'll invest, but I'll do it at 10 pence a share. We don't want that. I think we have safe pairs of hands. To repeat, we were able to raise £5 million at very, very short notice. I would prefer to work with the existing group I've got who remain committed to the club, and when I think we've got a more investable case, when there's greater certainty on the cash flows and the future of the club, I think that's the right time to go to external investors and say, look, this is the case that we've got here, this is the level, this is the value of the investment, now come and participate with us. But I think we're at least probably a year away from even being in a position to go to the market. But it's something I would like to do, and I think it's something important for the club. It shouldn't long-term be based on a few key individuals. We've seen that hasn't worked for the club before.
So just to be clear, even if someone approached you to invest right now, you'd like to keep the model as it is currently?
Well, if someone approached me and made me a very handsome offer, then one might look at that. But I can't see someone sensibly approaching us without doing a due diligence on the club. And the fact right now, if he was to ask me questions about the outlook for the myriad of litigation that we've still got going on, I don't have any clarity and transparency and visibility on that. Therefore, I couldn't communicate that to an investor. So I really think the climate is not right now for investors outside those who are in it for the softer reasons, such as myself and all the investors I referred to this morning. We're not doing it with an investment return in mind. Once you go to external investors, they're looking for a return in their investment. And right now, we're not in a position to guarantee a return because we're running a deficit cash flow that's being funded by the investors. So I really think we just need a bit of time to stabilise and have greater visibility on the fortunes of the club going forward.
You also mentioned commercial contracts during the meeting. These are obviously commercial contracts away from Sports Direct. Are you expecting to make progress with them in the kind of near future?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at some of the, a lot of the commercial contracts have been, and I'm not talking about Sports Direct now, just to make sure there's no injunction. A lot of the commercial contracts, I think, were poorly negotiated. I think partly Rangers found itself in difficult circumstances in terms of the media value, but I think that those charged with looking after the club at that time were kind of short-sighted, knee-jerk in some of the negotiations, didn't really see beyond the next couple of weeks of the next season. But a lot of these are maturing as well, so we are in a position to go to partners and other investors, and I think at the right level of value that we think that the Rangers name, the Rangers brand should support. So there are a number of opportunities we are looking at right now to get back to what I regard as a more normal valuation of the Rangers brand when we're negotiating with potential partners.
Do you expect improvements to be made before the end of this season to those?
There's nothing maturing within this season, but I would say it would start next season and then continually increase as the other contracts mature. We will start to replace them, I think, with contracts at far better value for the club that recognises the true position of Rangers in the Scottish, British and European football market.
And speaking of the football, have you been happy with how the team's been shaping up this season?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think if anyone had said at the beginning of the season you'll get kind of 12 wins and a draw, but 37 points out of 42, you'd have taken it. And it's been, slightly more exciting because Hibs obviously have had a fantastic run. I think they've won 8 in the spin or something like that in the league. So they're showing a bit of competition as well. So I think it has been good. But generally speaking, I think the performance of the team has been good. The results have been good. The fan reaction has been good, and I think the comments they will listen to there, directed towards Mark, I think gave an indication that there's a great appreciation, not only for what's happening on the field in terms of results, but for the level of entertainment the fans, I think, are enjoying in the style and the way that the team are playing. But a lot of room for improvement where we're nowhere near where we need to be looking forward to next season and thereafter. So there's still a lot has to be done to continue to improve the team.
Do you expect to be making some changes in January to that team? Are you offering investment to that?
I would be very surprised if we don't make changes. I think we've indicated to Mark that if he identifies players that he thinks can, and it's really not so much about winning the league this year. Identification of players in January would be based on our prospects for them thereafter. So we'd have to bring in players that we thought were going to compete next season strongly in the Premier League and already looking towards Europe. So You know, we have chatted to Mark, we said if he wants to look at players, he must bring them to us, but the mandate is make sure that there are improvements on the squad that we've got and compete at a higher level. There should be long-term solutions, not stopgap.
Will Mark approach you with a target rather than the board giving him a specific pool of money and saying this is how much money you've got to spend?
It's always that way. I think the target comes first. Clearly money becomes a factor eventually, but we're not constraining it by money. You know, the message to Mark is you go out and you identify your targets and then you come to us. It may be we can't sign all your targets, and I think, you know, what we've said to Mark is you might not get all the players that you want, but you'll never get a player you don't want.
Okay. Are you happy? Is the work that Mark's done and Davy Weir's done as well, is it more than you kind of envisaged? As you said, you would have bitten the hand off to take 12 wins and a draw.
Yeah, I think even more than that. I think if you look at the level of business that they've done in the transfer market, and I said it earlier on, I think they've been uncommonly successful, because if you go out and bring in that number of players, you know, you might get 70% work and 30% on for settling in reasons or whatever. And virtually every player that they've brought in actually are performing and have adapted very, very quickly. So that's been, you know, very fortunate from our point of view. But also what one is not seeing on the pitch is the level of contribution that they've made going back down to the academy and right throughout the club. And there's some very, very significant improvements and changes that for someone who, like myself, who was on the previous board, who was there at the time, in fact, when we built Auchenhowie, and I've sat in that, for 10 years I sat in the board and we spoke about youth, and nothing actually really happened. I think we had an infrastructure, but we didn't have the human resource element in the operating structure to make it really, really work. And I feel for the first time, you know, with Mark and Davy and that management team, they brought in a structure right throughout the club. And one really gets a sense of a true vision. In fact, for the first time when I was listening to the presentations from the football team yesterday and from the academy and what's happening there, I really started to get excited that there's a kind of common vision, a real energy, a real passion and a real way forward. So I'm really optimistic, and I think that's what's hidden from supporters. They're seeing what's happening on the park, but they're not seeing the huge amount of effort, resources and changes in personnel that have gone in behind the scenes as well, which I think will stand us in good stead going forward.
Yeah, how crucial is the academy, kind of your business plan and the future of the club being able to produce players who can play in the first team?
It's very important. I think for Scottish football, you know, Joanna, if you look at the wage differential, you know, between, I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, Rangers were competing with the Premier League clubs. You know, we could bring in players, Richard Gough from Spurs and a whole bunch of top English internationals and pay them more than they got in England. We now struggle to compete wages-wise with bottom-end championship clubs. So the only way we really can survive, because that's the quality of player we need, but they're earning so much down there, is in fact to be bringing some youngsters through ourselves who can pay where, I mean, it's just an obvious business case for any club in Scotland, quite frankly, not just for Rangers.
Mm-hmm. And if we just talk a little bit about the meeting today, was it quite nice to chair a normal board meeting? Because I know you said about 10 in the past. Was it a little different to ones that you've sat on?
From the AGM, yeah, it was different for me in two ways. It was different for me because I was normally sitting and no one ever asked me a question. It was always David Murray and the football manager, Walter Smith at the time. So that was different, but I think the difference was probably more pronounced for some of my colleagues like John Gilligan and Paul, who'd been attending the more recent meetings, where they were telling me this morning that the whole board was booed when they came in last year, and the chairman was booed when he tried to make his chairman's speech. So clearly it was very, very pleasant to go into an environment where I think we're all very, very warmly received, and I think the questions were intelligent questions in the interest of the club, but they weren't vindictive. It was people trying to really find out what we were doing and how we're going forward. So there was a kind of positive energy, I think, through the room in every single question that was asked and the reaction to answers to the questions. So it really, it's gratifying because, you know, we're all doing it for the same reason, and you think you're doing the right thing, and you know, at least once a year you can go and face the supporters and shareholders and get a sense from whether they think you're doing the right thing. And certainly I get a warm feeling today that there is a level of recognition and appreciation from the supporters for what the board is doing, and it just makes you feel better, and it gives you even more energy to say, look, let's continue on this path. It's being recognised, it's being supported, and let's keep on doing it. So I think the board felt good about it. I think the shareholders felt good about it. So I think all in all, it was very gratifying from my point of view to get through this morning's meeting.
I think questions about football over the last few years have been rare, and even a question on the Wi-Fi. Does it mean from your point of view, that things are maybe getting a little bit more back to normal?
Yeah, exactly. There was a little bit of normalcy, and I think that as things progress, during the course of the year, I mean, I would think by next year there'll be very, very few questions on the off-field activities, other than one expects of shareholders interested in the running of their business. But I think it was certainly far more balanced and calm than it would have been, say, 3 or 4 months ago. So I think normal service is being resumed, if I can use that old term.